You're listening to the Physio Matters podcast in association with exerciseprescriber.com, and this is session 61. Welcome back to the Physio Matters podcast. I'm Jack Chew, and this is a very special edition for us as it's the launch of what we're calling Season 2 or 2.0 of the Physio Matters podcast. We've done 5 years of monthly episodes, as we talk about a little in this show, and this brings you into one of our team meetings, essentially, a reflection from me and the Physio Matters team on not just last year, but also the 5 years that have come before it. But it was a particularly big year for us in 2018. We recorded this episode in December. It gives us a little bit of downtime, bit of breathing space. We've done it each year, and it's really valuable to us. But particularly this year for us to be able to reset, as we're going to go again using some of your favourite formats, of course. So no massive revamp there, but a bit of a change in angle, change in personnel to some extent, and certainly welcoming Jack March as my boss on this show. So you'll still be hearing me behind the microphone, but certainly a lot of the planning and prep is being delegated in order for me to continue with things like the big R's, as well as managing our new headquarters in Timperley, Manchester. So you'll hear lots more about that on this show, so I will keep this intro brief, but do bear in mind that we'll be transferring, as it is described in this episode, over to Anchor, which will be our new patron service, because unfortunately Patreon's having some problems and we're having some problems with it, so we'll be transferring some of our crowdfunding over to that. But do keep an eye out on Kickstarter. In January and February we're going to be launching a bit of a kickstart, as it is described, to our new project to make sure we bring you more audio and visual content, because we're instigating change and we're going to be really trying to help bring you the conversations as we have them. So we're talking on a weekly basis with clinical professors, clinicians, leading lots of change on a clinical, operational and organisational level. There is absolutely no reason for us to not bring you into those conversations if that was sufficiently funded to afford our time in that direction. So with our new facilities, we want to bring you more content if we can afford to do so. And so that's why we're starting a Kickstarter campaign. If we reach the targets on that, then we'll be bringing you more content. So do keep an eye out on our social media channels for it. But in the meantime, I bring you this episode with me and my team. Thank you so much for listening over the years. Thank you so much to their team for doing all that they do. But I get a little mushy at the end of this episode, so I'll certainly shut up now. And I bring you episode 61 of the Physio Matters podcast with the Physio Matters podcast team. I'll see you at the other side. Okay, we're here with the bravest podcast of them all. It's the annual team podcast, which gets more voices than you're used to and more chaos than we're used to. Always my favourite, though, if I'm honest, because it's all of my favourite people gathering around talking about our favourite things, which is, of course, our shared project, which is the Physio Matters podcast. Comes to us this year on our 5-year anniversary. It's completely blown my mind. I still can't believe that's happened. Whereas Mrs. Chew, who isn't on this podcast, certainly remembers every single one of them, because it's usually something goes amiss, at least briefly, and she loses me for a few more hours than I'm meant to every first Sunday of the month. So we're here at episode 61, 60 monthly episodes in the bag, and I want to reflect with our team and discuss it in full about what's to come next year and for the following 5 years, as well as then talking about what is an incredible year we've had, not just on the podcast, but then we've bled out into wider physio-y culture, which is a bit of a crazy one, but we have. And so I'd like, if we can, to do a bit of a lap of the, not room, but the online space over Skype from various different corners of the UK to introduce yourselves, gang, to those who might not know who you are.
Who do you want to start?
I don't care. I thought Flick might join first. I thought the sound check would have given us a cue.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Oh well, I'll go first then. So I'm Flick. I'm calling from Newcastle. I'll be keeping everyone to time, hopefully.
Jim, who are you?
So my name's Jack. I am rheumatology specialist physio, calling from deepest, darkest Norfolk. Tend to be the southernest voice on these sound waves, trying to keep the diversity going for us all.
The elder statesman, both in various ways, actually, both in terms of actual years on planet, but also years in Physio Matters colours, is Rich Barnes. Welcome back to the show.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me here in the sunny Midlands. So 5 years. Wow, that's certainly gone quick. I've been the general hanger-on in various guises, IT genius and part-time Matters podcast choir lead.
That's a great way. And George Goodwin, introduce yourself to the gang. You won't have been on the show before, this one at least, I don't think, but one of our apprentices from yesteryear, but now an integral part of the team. So tell everyone who you are, where you're coming from.
I'm coming from Nottingham. I'm the baby of the group, so I do as I told. And I'm an MSK physio at the moment.
At the moment, okay, that sounds ominous. You see, pending how this podcast goes, right? Brilliant. That's great, George. Such optimism for how this is going to end. Fantastic. Yeah. So Flick said that she's going to keep us the time. She does that very well. Wields the diary, and tonight the stopwatch. And so very excited for that. Just for those who, well, not that there's many that are going to care exactly how we do this, but we're all cutting our videos on Skype to make sure that the bandwidth doesn't strain, but we're leaving flicks on so she can wag her finger at us at the right times, and she can tap her watch. Like any of our typical meetings that we bring you into, that you don't get brought into, then this will be chaotic and daft, but a lot of fun. And so I'm pleased to bring it to you, and delighted with the team that we continue to somehow persuade to volunteer on this ever crazy roller coaster. So I'm always excited for it. One of the things that we've always tried to do as the team has built and the listenership has grown, and we've tried to visit different topics and really make sure that we cover different angles, is that we made sure that we try to gather feedback and survey data from as many as we can. Now, that used to be a fairly large-scale thing on an annual basis. I think we did miss one last year, which was we kick ourselves for. We got caught up in things. We launched the Big R's, which we'll talk about a little later. But in doing so, I think we did miss that punctuation point that we usually do, which is to ask for feedback in a formal manner over a survey. But we remembered this year, and Jack's collated that for us. And so I think it would be sensible for us to start there. Instead of us wading in with our reflections, what have our listeners thought of us this year, Jim?
Thanks. I think there were some interesting things come back from the survey. I tried to keep it a bit simpler this year because, like you say, last year we just didn't end up with the time to do it really. And I always think if we're going to do something, then we need to do it properly, really. So I kept it a bit simpler to try and just get the answers to the questions we sort of wanted, really, to help to sort of shape the podcast really moving forwards into 2019. We'll probably come to it, but we've had a bit of a sort of funny year this year, and I think we're going to change things up a little bit to try and make it a bit more organised and sort things out a little bit so that it's a bit more of a polished product. And some of the answers here are really going to help us move forwards, I think, which is quite nice. So I did keep it quite simple, and I'll go through a few things that I sort of found interesting. We don't have to go into everything by detail, but one of the things that struck me immediately, I asked the question of what platforms people listen on, and interestingly, out of our responses, sort of 10% had already moved to Spotify. And while I think we've actually been available on Spotify for about 3 months, we only started advertising it about a month ago, and it did get a good reaction on social media. And I have to admit, I've moved to Spotify to listen to our episodes, and I don't know why. It just seems better. I don't know what that is. It's just easier to deal with, and I think people can use Spotify quite nicely. I'm on Android on my phone, and I just don't like the apps that are available. I used to listen on iTunes when I was in the dark ages of an iPhone. But
easier to deal with is brilliant. Like, you're tolerating it. Right? It's easier for you to just cope with the hassle of having to listen. Oh, with such brilliant adverts between you and George's abandoning of the profession that seems to be pending. It's easier to deal with.
Your voice as much as we do, so sometimes it can be a bit of a chore.
I've hardly been on it this year, you cheeky jet. Right, anyway, proceed.
Yeah, thanks. So so one of the other questions that was really, really nice to hear actually was we asked how helpful people had found Physio Matters over the last 5 years, and we rated it on a scale of 0 to 10, and the lowest score we got was a 6, which is always nice. But actually, if you look at the number of responses, the sort of well over 75% was 8 or above. So I'm pretty happy with that sort of feedback, that no one sort of rated it down low. And I know we're getting a bit of a biased source, but before we've had people sort of mentioning quite negative comments regarding various things when we've done these. So the fact that no one's rated it even below a 6 is really quite nice. So I was quite happy with that. And moving forwards, I'd hope we can push that slightly higher into this year with a bit more of a polished product. So we'll do this again going onwards. But really, out of this, the most that we wanted to get out of the survey was to really get everybody's opinions on who they wanted to hear on the podcast, and the different topics that they might want to hear. We get a lot of emails, tweets and Facebook about different people and different topics, and I'm not going to lie, we brush off quite a few because either we've got something similar coming up, or we've just done something similar, or something like that. But I think we really need to try and take on board what people want, because there is quite a large variation, and we got a huge list of guests and topics. And I do want to just go around a little bit. I've sent out the list to you guys, and I wanted to go through a little bit about sort of your favourite one, or one that you'd particularly like to see on the podcast this year, just to get us cracking. And then a bit later we'll sort of tee up some that we've already got cracking on. So I think as it's George's first go, what was your sort of standout, George? What do you sort of want to hear on the podcast this year?
Okay, so I'm going to be that person already. So we're talking about questions that we want on the upcoming year, Jack.
Yeah.
Okay. I think my first one may be something around kind of overdiagnosis, overmanagement of I suppose just MSK conditions. I don't know if it's just the way that I tend to think, but I think personally, I seem to find myself, assessing and treating people that I don't think that they have a great deal going kind of on with them, and they have a great deal wrong with them. So I don't know whether it comes from kind of like scans and imaging where they just find really specific things, but I tend to feel like there's a bit of an overdiagnosis kind of thing going on. So that'd be one. I'd quite like to maybe learn a bit more about some maybe kind of specific conditions I don't know a great deal about. So maybe something on kind of spinal stenosis would be really good. It's not something that I've kind of seen a lot in the kind of podcast world and the discussion based kind of topics about that. So I'd quite like that. And then finally maybe something on the kind of the maybe the groin pain, groin conditions, but probably not specific to something like FAI, which I know there's been a lot of that kind of on recently. So maybe something kind of groin related, but not to do with the hip joint.
That's cool. You're on your first one. I think from my point of view, one of my current roles with Nuffield at the moment, I get to see some reports from physios who are sort of requesting more treatment and various things like that. And I think that, while I definitely agree with you with overdiagnosis, I think that's a difficult one to tackle, but sort of over-treatment is rife, I think. And I don't know, I don't know how we've sort of got ourselves into this with I mean, I'm solely in the private world sort of now, and I think I see so many people having a lot of different treatments, not necessarily too many treatment sessions, but so many different approaches to treating conditions. And I think we're just all harping back to something a bit more simple. But I think that would be a really good episode for us to try and get on. I think it would be interesting to get something.
A weird one with the overdiagnosis thing, because it's like that is something that sort of cropped up quite a bit and continues to. And whenever we do a podcast, there's our leading expert on there decides to mention that sort of thing, or a flavour of overdiagnosis or misdiagnosis, overtreatment, mistreatment. It tends to be, yeah. I mean, I think I agree with you, Jim, rife. But frustratingly, and it's something that is a shame that with that comes the contrarian take, where there's a suggestion that there's an underdiagnosis or undertreatment or poor care in the other direction, where there's a complacency that sets in, which whilst exists, I certainly have seen less of than I have what you and George have described there. And but I think that sometimes that's a conversation we end up needing to have. Really, is the line between under and over, and the fact that essentially it's incredibly trendy to not have nuanced conversations about both. But as soon as someone's mentioning the fact that there's overdiagnosis and overtreatment going on, then in someone else's next breath, they're busy laughing and scoffing and suggesting, yeah, but people are being dismissed left, right and centre as being centrally sensitised and not being treated for this serious red flag that they've had rumbling along. And so whilst, of course, those things exist, it's sort of, there seems to be just a poor set of people that aren't morally triaging these things appropriately, or even registering that the numbers matter in terms of the frequency that we encounter these sorts of things. And so, long-winded way of me agreeing with you, but if we were to visit the overdiagnosis thing as suggested, then I think that we need to find someone that's willing to have those tough conversations and bring some data to bear about that where we know it, and also talk about the fact that we don't want to swing too far the other way, because it does happen, although I don't think at the same frequency.
I think it's a hard balance to strike, because you're always, if you put 5 physios in front of the same patient, then you probably end up with 5 different diagnoses or working theories. But I think I try to have a working diagnosis rather than sort of something definitive, and you sort of see how things develop over time. And I think rather than potentially a topic where we sort of try and nail down where that line is, it's more about that sort of skill of, can you keep your mind open to red flags, to non-MSK conditions, etc., whilst also providing a sensible treatment plan that could address it if it is actually an MSK issue. And I think it's just some sort of sensible information around how you manage that. Like, I think we're going to come to this later, but Andrew Cuff's podcast on red flags that we had earlier in the year was really nice for that, where he was sort of saying, you don't rule in or rule out red flags, you just remain vigilant. And I think if we could have something where we apply that to more broadly, I think that's possibly a really nice episode to have a good conversation about.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's it. That people are very. It's not about a red flag thing in that sense, is it? It's about just wrecking sure that you keep more cards on the table until you're really confident to knock them off, instead of the idea that you've got to narrow your index of suspicion very quickly. Especially when there's complex people in complex situations. So no, I agree with that. And on to George's point about the groin, it's funny how we end up visiting body parts, don't we, through the exploration of other things. So groin pain will come up in OA Hip podcast and FAI podcast this year, as well as then in Red Flags podcast for when we're looking out for lymphoma and stuff. But visiting the groin pain as a region, say through your reductor or other flexor, the tendinopathies, and how that interacts with the abdomen and stuff, I think is a great shout, and it's definitely something that I think should be high on our list.
Yeah, definitely. Barnesy, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, mate. So I guess with my sort of background in persistent pain management, lots of scope really for pain related topics. I guess condition specific stuff. Some of the more weird and wonderful ones maybe are, things we don't see a lot of, things like chronic regional pain. Certainly be interested in looking at something around that, but also something that was brought back to me, I think, by some of the excellent stuff that our colleague Tom Jessen puts out there on Twitter, was the argument that seems to have gone on a little bit this year on Twitter around sort of what central sensitization isn't, what it's assessed by, etc., etc. I think it's certainly something that I've noticed that's come to the fore again this year. Been one or two little Twitter spats about it, and I kind of wonder if that'd be nice to get some deeper understanding with some of the literature and current scientific understanding.
It's certainly a raising burden, isn't it, for us in MSK? I think.
Yeah, and I guess I think the difficulty is it's quite easy, or it's become quite simple to write off an element of a persistent pain presentation as, oh, there's some central changes going on here. Well, I mean, that in a lot of cases that's a pretty sensible conclusion to come to, but it's quite a broad brush, and I think it's an easy thing to put on the end of your notes as almost like a catch-all. So I guess, in a deeper understanding across MSK, rather than it just necessarily being a pain specific thought thing, I think that would be undoubtedly more helpful.
I think you've volunteered yourself to run that pod.
Yeah. No, I'm all over that. I'm all over that. Yeah, certainly be interested, because there's one or two conflicting thoughts about it this year, which have been interesting to read from sort of the background. Certainly wouldn't put myself down as an expert, so I've kind of not dipped my toe significantly into the conversation, but just something that's been really interesting for me to sort of watch from the background, and I've sort of had a little bit of a wing at some of the papers to develop a little bit more understanding. So we're getting that out to a wider audience, I think, and increasing people's general understanding, because I think the thirst is there. Certainly I see in clinic with a lot of my MSK colleagues, there is a thirst there to look at, or understand and learn more about persistent pain and its assessment. But I guess those tools need to be brought to the fore a little bit more.
I suppose I don't know how to word it, so it's clumsy, but the depth of, or the extent of sort of central plastic changes at the ponds and things like that were often discussed, but less so these days, but certainly were good cases for these what seem to be more rigid than malleable pain states that seems resistant to care. One of the big things that seems to be, when we talk in that direction, both on and off the podcast with people, is that the big contention comes when we start trying to apply it or be pragmatic about what that means and how that presents itself, and how that might influence your assessment and your treatment, because that seems to become contentious even amongst experts, because there's some that would be arguing that the nitty-gritty detail, the distinctions between those things and how they are articulated in a neuroscience or otherwise explanation to things seem to really matter. And then in other cases, that there's people that will advocate the fact that, no matter how hard they try to comprehend it, it doesn't necessarily change the way in which they go about trying to care for that individual once they've understood their story, and then building them up through functional change. So like juxtaposing podcasts from last year rather than this year, being sort of you got your contrast between Mick Stacker's specificity of explanation versus say Ben Cormack, Greg Lehman, who are then, from what I can understand, whilst not neuroscientists to that extent and want to be championed that way, but certainly people that have a firm enough grasp, or firmer than most of us, that then try to then say, whenever they try to think about that, when they try and map it onto a patient's situation, they don't find themselves necessarily needing or wanting to do anything vastly different. And that for me just seems like such an interesting conflict to be continuing to rage on, because I think patients get stuck in the middle of that, getting lumped in some ways, and then overly specifically they end up in the weeds on the other side.
Pain
science. Pain science. That's a great verb, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, maybe as an offshoot of that, something that also has really sort of come to the fore with me recently, having been on the sort of start delivering on the pain management programs, is the background behind opiate-induced hyperalgesia. I think in terms of developing a more understanding of that, because I think that's I do think that's something that potentially is really useful as an explanation to patients at the coalface. Certainly, you certainly see a few heads turn when the sort of background behind that was mentioned on the program, and people's thoughts about, well, actually, maybe reducing your medications could actually improve your overall outcomes. So something like that would be useful.
Amazing how we're seeing some of the side effects, excuse the pun, of that process, as well as people get moved on to what is supposedly safer medications, pregabalin being a classic, in which they're then being piled onto pregabalin as the prices come down marginally, and then ending up in these savage side effect situations or withdrawals. Withdrawal of which I've spoken about on this show, haven't I? Where you end up with this crazy. It's so intense that people will often never swear to never take another tablet of it again, just in case they're ever without it, because it's such a savage experience. And that essentially this thing where we don't seem to learn from the mistakes that get made and just find another drug, whereas really it should be about trying to look at that bigger picture, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Yeah, this sounds good to me. I think I was joking the other day about us having to do another pain podcast. And I think we
you get double team now, because you've got Flick and me.
And Tom Jeffers. I think it starts to get a bit like a stuck record to me, but there's so many avenues for us to explore, isn't it? Nick, do you want to do your ones, picking out from there, and then we'll skip me and Chewy, because we've rattled on longer than I thought we were going to about this, but I'm interested.
Can I do? So I've got someone wrote, a couple of people I think wrote research, but someone in particular wrote qualitative research, which I thought was really interesting. Two reasons really. Partly because I'm doing a master's at the minute, and I'd be intrigued to do a bit more dabbling into qualitative research, but also because I took part in some research qualitative this summer, 2 bits, and I kind of felt sorry for the people who had to transcribe all that stuff, but I feel like it's got. One of them was about female Newcastle United fans, so she was there for about 3 hours with me chatting away. Anyway, she I'd like to know more about the process. I'd like to know more about how approachable it is to do some research in that area. I'd like to know how useful the outcomes are as well. But it does appeal to me that they're looking at themes as opposed to the looking at chi-squared student t-tests. So that's my first one. The second one, sciatica, because I was in the room with Anina Schmidt at the conference, and I feel like you can't really learn too much about sciatica, can you? It's the sort of thing we see so much, and you start to think, same old sciatica, but actually there's an awful lot to know. And my third one, I've written down, someone had suggested motivational interviewing / communication. What I really want, again, referencing to the conference, is Jo Gibson to provide me with her module that she learned, the communication module. Just in a 50-minute podcast, that'd be great. Thanks, Jo.
That would be quality.
Yes. But no, motivational interviewing, I think it would be a good... I'm certain you couldn't get a grasp on it on a podcast, but I think it would be a good foundation.
Yeah, well, I think we've got good news for you later, Flick, with those when we talk about next year for those three.
Brilliant.
I think we were all when Anina did her Big R's presentation. I think we all just. I think I couldn't even keep tweeting, even though I blocked our account, I think, by that point. But I could, like, she said she just blew everybody out the water when she started saying a couple of things about sciatica. And it's like you say, we see quite a lot of it, and you just sort of, it becomes sort of normal almost, the referred pain into the legs. And then you think, get someone like Anina who knows it so much depth, and she can just give you so much information about it so quickly, and you suddenly realize how little you know. And I think that's going to be an absolute winner, that podcast, if we can sort that out.
Yeah, it seems it's such that's exactly an example of how the conversation can go so awry with pain states such as that, where essentially it's aching to neglect if you overlump people into just having, generic, arguably psychosocial factors that then end up just being that they're ignoring the intraneural inflammation and other factors that Nina talks about with regards to even, small fibre entrapment neuropathy issues and all that sort of stuff. It's just frustrating that sometimes that conversation seems to everyone's got a team, and so people like her that will appropriately go through the gears and respectfully look at all angles, and then discuss where she falls on that spectrum without bottling it and just being overly vague. It's so novel. And I think that's one of the things with Joe Gibson being mentioned there as well, is that I'd find a way, if we can, in the podcast over the next 12 months to try and work out, if possible, as to how much of these high-flung skills that we observe in these heroes of ours are trainable to us mere mortals. I just think, well, how much of a percentage point of all these characters is something that we've all got the capacity to do, because they're incredible individuals that just seem to be really at the 0.1% of that we're just so lucky to have them in our profession. And whilst I'm not trying to be pessimistic about that we all can't do better, because of course we can, but it's just like sometimes I'm amazed as to the goals that we're chasing and the characters that we're aspiring to be like. They just continue to blow me away, and people I've been paying attention to for a long time now. And each time we hear them or we give them a platform with a slightly different angle, and it's just amazing how much it blows us all away, isn't it?
Definitely. Unbelievable.
Yeah, no, without a doubt.
It just like Flick said, when we're a Big R's, and my exposure to Joe Gibson was the podcast on shoulders, and you see her tweet about shoulders, and she's at best tweeting about shoulders and stuff, and then she just absolutely smashes the biopsychosocial model, and I'm like, I don't know one thing half as well as Joe knows tons of stuff, and I don't want to liken my brain to a computer, but I just don't believe that I've got the hard drive space for that sort of thing. It's crazy ability to not only know those things, but translate it across to you in an understandable way as well.
Yeah, it seems to be relevant as well, doesn't it? The fact that these are polymathic people that can have different ways in which they're able to comprehend lots of the different areas of theory that then applies to practice, rather than narrowing themselves. And so when you see them being highly specialised, you almost expect that they're having to contain that knowledge within a high specialism, and that there's going to be things that they've therefore neglected to integrate. Whereas actually it turns out you ask them in that direction and they've considered those variables too. So yeah, intimidating but admirable. And it's so good to still have a platform that exists that we can give them to try, and growing platforms, of course, to get those ideas out there. Because if we're not trying to help good ideas beat bad ones, then I'm not sure what we bother doing. So it seems that we're continually able to do that, and they continue to blow us away. So I like all your ideas for next year, guys. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, well, on to so we'll skip me and you out, Chewy, with what we want, because it doesn't matter. But so moving on to our topics that we've sort of for a teaser trailer for 2019. Some of the things we've got in the pipeline already. I mean, I don't even know how my brain's going to cope, but we're already got a podcast on the hands and wrist. That's going to be we're hoping to have 2 guests on there, which are just it's going to be crazy level of understanding. I think if I asked, well, I'll ask you guys what do you feel like your confidence is in assessing and treating a hand? Because for me, it's got to be the lowest lowest on my what I would perceive to be my skill set of ability in the joints of the peripheral joints. I don't know what you guys are like.
Well, that's the rheumatologist among us, the rheumatologist. So I think we're going to be even less.
Yeah. That's the 5-minute Google search on Physiopedia et al. Before your patient comes through the clinic door, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm worried about Jim's credibility now for the fact that if he's not good at hands as our rheumatology go-to, then what the hell's he been doing? But yeah, I see
spines and tendons. I
see what you mean, though, Jack. I think it's a really tricky area that's going to be a minefield, but I'm sure we'll be able to do it justice, and I doubt we're all alone there. It's always here's hoping that others feel the same way and that we've still got our finger on the pulse, right?
There's the perception there, maybe that it's a real specialist setting kind of niche. I think probably if you're working in a community MSK clinic, it's about your confidence in terms of have you got the right equipment, have you got the right rehab tools, how can you change that around, where are you in terms of stages with a patient, the dainty things, aren't they, compared to other big parts of the body. So
also in the pipeline, sciatica, hoping Tom Jessen's going to get all over that one. So that should be, should be brilliant. We've also got one which is much more down my specialism street. If anybody's doubting my abilities, we're hoping to do another tendons podcast, but looking outside of your normal load-based presentation. So more along the inflammatory arthropathies and the other reasons you might get a tendinopathy, and looking at the management of those as well. So that should be a really good podcast as well that we can go for. And then we've also got motivational interviewing and communication in the pipeline as well. So hopefully we'll get all of Flick's New Year's wishes. We'll get into those podcasts being made. So already we're not even into January yet, and I'm sort of really looking forward to the first half of the year of those podcasts. So
I don't know which came first, chicken or egg there, but it does just sound like you've just bandwagoned Flick's ideas and she's just getting her way, doesn't it?
I filled out 40 of the surveys, and this is what's come of it.
Flick's bribing Jack somehow. Yeah, there's something going on, but no, they're all cracking ideas for sure. It's funny.
Also, the research topic coming up as well. So all of the stuff that's fallen out of your head since your undergrad research module, but presented in a much more entertaining, palatable way.
That's a good. You've just reminded me there, Flick, with the qualitative thing. It's like just in case we don't touch enough controversy, we're going to wade into that as the validity of qualitative methods. So that'll be fun. That'll make us some friends.
Yeah, I can't wait for that as well. Yeah, so aside from the topics next year, we've done 5 years. We'll aim for another 5 years. I think. I don't know what Chewy thinks about that, but we'll aim. This is 5 years part 2, so we're going to reboot season 2 of the Physio Matt podcast. So we've got a few different things coming out. So we're going to change up the look of a few things. But some sort of technical changes behind the scenes as well, which hopefully will make everything run a little bit more smoothly. But Flick, you've got a couple of updates for us as well, haven't you, about some different things?
The newsletter. The reason everyone's tuned in, the newsletter update.
Yeah.
So we're hopefully going to make it a bit more user friendly. I really like writing the newsletter, and I think it's quite good. I think it's a good recap of the podcast, if I say so myself.
There's 3 others that agree with you.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Although feedback on the one I did in 2018 was particularly good. Flick,
good it was when I was on holiday. I was good.
Stick it at the back post, and I'll stick it in the net.
Brilliant. No, go on. Sorry.
But the problem with our newsletter is not very user friendly. It's not very pretty to read, and there's often quite a lot crammed in with very little font. So hopefully we're going to look at a slightly more attractive newsletter for next year.
So how would you sign up for that, Flick, if people want to get ahead of the game?
Yes, you can sign up on the website. So if you scroll, I believe it's if you scroll right down to the bottom of the Choose Health /TPMP website, there's a sign up. You can just simply put your email in. It should be there. If not, give us a shout on social media.
Yeah, just scroll to the bottom. I don't know how many times I answered that question over the years, but just scroll all the way to the bottom and you'll find it. You can't miss it if you do that.
We used a really primitive plugin, didn't we, back in the day? It was like, so it is quite ugly, but it's worked its purpose for now. But I think if we're going to be integrating MailChimp as the plan is, then that's going to have, it's much more of a pleasant interface, but also means that we'll be able to make it even simpler to sign up. And be able to embed that within the body of blog posts that become podcast posts and stuff like that. So I think that's going to be easier for everyone. But it is I was jesting about its popularity, but it's absolutely going from strength to strength, and it is amazing just how some people do seem to not realise just how many resources are attached to the podcast, and therefore the free downloads that they get and the summaries that they get on a monthly basis and stuff. Those that are into it, that's why people say that the Physio Matters guides their CPD month by month isn't just because of the show, but it's because of the peripheral resources that then they get. So definitely, if you're not already, then sign up for that.
Yeah, to highlight that, because we get a lot of people say, you mentioned this resource, that resource, where are they? And that's in the Google Drive, which the link is in the newsletter. And I uploaded loads of stuff from Val about the elbow this week. So it's brilliant. It's kind of bursting at the seams.
It's a shame we can't make that a pretty link, isn't it? I mean, it's funny with the Google Drive thing. It's I mean, we'll try to make that front and center on not just newsletters but future posts and stuff. But yeah, people, if you don't realize already, then the podcast has every single episode of Physio Matters now. 61 of them as of this one are then that has accompanying literature as mentioned in the podcasts. And so yeah, if you they're all there, free to download.
Yeah, that is one heck of a resource. And doesn't it have all the old newsletters in there as well?
No.
No?
But
it's definitely got some of mine from about 2015.
Yeah, not for 2 years then. But
we can archive them when we move over, can't we?
That's easily added.
No, you just made work for Flick on air, Jim.
Yeah.
Tell you what, Jack, do you know what I miss? Physio Natters.
Do you know, I miss Physio Natters, and I've heard tens, if not thousands of people requesting Physio Natters to come back. And as a result, we're going to bring Physio Natters back.
Get in!
I think those tens of thousands of people might all be in my head, but we're still going to bring it back. But we're going to bring it back in a bit of a different format, I think. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to go monthly again. With Physio Natters, but we're going to make it sort of more reactional than it was previously. So when we tried to run it before, it was like a mini Physio Matters episode, really, and it was too difficult to keep up with, and with it running on YouTube, it didn't really work. So we're going to reboot it in a different format. So it'll run on Facebook. It'll be a live record, usually with myself and one of the other members of the team. But if I'm not available, then hopefully two of the other members of the team will jump on.
And it's going to just to clarify, it's going to be reactional, is it?
Reactional to what's going on.
I don't think that's a word, Jim. I'm trying to wind you up. I think honestly, I'm keen. Can someone fact check this, please? Am I bantering him unfairly? Can someone Google this, please? Because reaction, I want it to be a word. I know what you're trying to say.
I'm owning it.
But I love it. Absolutely brilliant.
Going to Oxford. So it'll be reactionary. And what essentially it'll be is we'll keep an eye on social media, and as Barnesy said, you know, these spats that come up or really interesting conversations, we'll have a bit of a chat about those, and we'll also update you on various bits of news. And reactional is a word.
Reactional is an adjective.
Okay, there you go. It's close enough.
I take it back.
Take it. So it'll last. It'll be about 10-15 minutes, something like that. It'll be live. You can tune in. You can interact with us. Ask us questions. We'll we'll have a bit of a discussion on mic, and I'm hoping that we even have like sort of mini little journal club as well, where if we see any nice papers on Facebook or Twitter, we'll bring those to people's attention, and go from there really. And I hope that it's just a really nice little monthly catch up with everybody who can make it. It'll be in the evening, so it's available to all, and we'll see how that runs really, and it'll be available for people to go back to if they want to. So I'm hoping that we'll reboot Natters in a way that's actually popular this time.
Yeah, I think it was fairly popular. It was just one of the things that, like you say, it ended up just we tried to step into our own sort of reputation in a sense, and just ended up having a doubling up the show because we were bleeding content at the time, weren't we? So it was just not feasible for us to keep that workload up. Whereas us musing on different topics, I think, is a smart move. I think it's a really good shout.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it. It gets me on the microphone a few more times as well, which I always enjoy.
I just love it when you're so reactional. Anything that does that, then I'm happy.
I'm always reactional. Just not pro-actional. That's my problem.
Quality.
More of that gold and Natters.
Well, one of the things that we started doing that for, wasn't it, was because we're thinking we wanted to create extra bonus content for patrons as we were starting to crowdfund, and thinking, we were going to need to do a 2-tier system in order to try and attract people that would help us stay on air, which is amazing, because within putting any new content or novel content on Patreon, then people saying that the reason that they wanted to support Physio Matters was because they loved the fact that it was open access, and so anything to be exclusive was just being sort of sneered at, and they were, can I share this with friends? And so quite quickly we stopped doing that, and then decided that the stuff we were planning to produce, we made that public as well. So that's funny how that was borne out. But certainly, Jack, you wanted to say a few words about the incredible few that have kept us on the air.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we've sort of. I remember back at the Cause Health conference a few years ago, when we were all stood in a room and we were umming and ahhing about whether we should launch on Patreon and see whether anybody would give us a little bit of money towards the podcast. And I mean, I think we're all delighted that we did, but I don't know what the listeners they won't know very much about the background, but me and you, Chewy, about just over a year ago, we had to have a conversation about, would we run the podcast monthly still? Would we, how would we change things up? To cut a long story short, we were out of money, weren't we? And we didn't know whether we could still carry on Physio Matters podcast in the same capacity as everybody's sort of grown up and loved it for the 5 years. So, and then, it exploded on Patreon, and those roughly 50 patrons of ours have genuinely kept us on the air in the same capacity. And I don't think we can thank them enough, really. Obviously, Exercise Prescriber as well have helped us out, sponsoring a number of episodes for us, and the other sponsors that we've had. But they sort of stand on the shoulders of the patrons who really do keep us going. I mean, we've had so many technical problems with the Choose Health website dying and all these sorts of things. And I think, you said at the beginning, we volunteer our time, we put our time into this, and none of us have ever complained about that, and I never would. It's been one of the most sort of fun things I've ever done. But without those patrons, we wouldn't be here in anywhere near the same format as we are now. So I mean, we're some of the technical things that are coming up in 2019, there will be a new way of sort of supporting the show, which will be similar to Patreon, but it'll run through our new hosting website. And even if people can donate just the tiniest amount of money, it really does actually keep us on the air and keeps us giving the CPD. I mean, we quote the numbers of downloads that we have, and we hit 2017 we'd hit over 1 million downloads, and for 50 people to give us a little bit of money to keep that going is just sort of brilliant, really.
I think we just set it up on something. We set it up on something that was such a whim. Like it was like we did not expect it to do as well as it did, and therefore the infrastructure wasn't sufficient to tolerate the numbers that it got quite quickly. And then we've just been chasing our tail ever since, and here we are 5 years. It's ridiculous, and I think we've been able to create some great stuff. But it's just that people wonder. They think, well, surely why if it's got a media host, then it wouldn't necessarily strain the bandwidth on the main site. But the fact that we've always decided to put on extra content, so straight away we're already doing newsletters, we're already linking it to other material, and we had a central resource there in which people were using. So essentially it was just every time it was a victim of its own success without a monetized model. And so essentially the fact that we're going to be able to try to make our systems more efficient by moving things to a more central platform. So instead of spreading it through between what we use now, Libsyn and Patreon, this plan that you've got to try and anchor it to Anchor is going to be a smart move. And I think that hopefully people will then support that. I think it's funny as well because we've got so few patrons. I think it's something like 60% of them have had a free course out of it. Because every quarter we do a free course that the guests will give. And so they get dished out on a regular basis. I think a couple of people have ended up getting offered at least 2 of them. So it's unbelievable, really. Yeah. So typically a fairly rewarding thing for those that have done it, but it is amazing and a very small, 0.02% is it of the listeners that have ever sent us a few quid. So incredible. Yeah. So yeah, thanks so much to those that do that. It really is amazing, and just the act of covering costs, because there were several moments in which it wasn't worth it, especially when we were getting frivolously sued for thinking in public and people just deciding that they wanted to try and shut us down because essentially we weren't doing it the proper way. We weren't challenging things in the right, prim and proper way that our profession and healthcare in general is expecting. And so we've had our challenges. So, but we're going strong now in various ways, purely off the back of this infrastructure work that's going to be done. I think is going to mean that we're going to have that longevity, but it certainly falls away quickly if we don't continue to have the support from those brave few that will stand up for us.
Yeah, and I think I genuinely think I don't know if people think a quid here or a dollar or whatever denomination it won't make any difference, but even just like it sounds really cheesy, but all those little tiny amounts, they just add up to if the website goes down and we need bandwidth and those sorts of things, money doesn't grow on trees, and we have never charged for anything, have we? And I think as soon as we wanted to, if we wanted to put adverts in the pod to keep us going or anything like that, then we'd lose a whole load of listeners. So just genuinely those 50 odd people are keeping this going for the rest of everybody else. So we can thank them, and I would hope that everybody who listens to this would thank them as well for keeping us going, really.
For sure. Can't remember where we're going next. What's crack now?
Oh, big R's, of course.
Oh yeah.
Is there any other topic?
Talking of agitation for change. Yeah. Well, I think what's funny is that's another. The big R's is a funny example of how we could easily have just as we're on the cusp of sort of becoming what could have been a commercially viable entity. So I don't just mean in terms of Physio Matters there, but essentially Choose Health had stood for something, and it had stood the test of time, and it had diversified beyond me and then beyond just a small group, and then essentially there were 10 of us that were all capable of both broadcast interviews, but also then we demonstrated our value at events, and we were starting to show people that essentially this wasn't all about an edited, polished product, in that we could do that live and we could be of use in various different capacities amongst the profession. And so this was this moment in which we're on the cusp of thinking, right, well, if you stick with the model that we've got and then find ways to monetize that, then that's something that could then start to pay us a few quid. And then what I did is I took that few quid that might have been made maybe sort of by a few sponsors, and then decided to instead pay the expenses of 55 people, put them in a room in Birmingham and launch the Big R's project, because we said that essentially all the guests that we'd ever had all agitated for reformative measures across different disciplines within the profession, and if those things didn't come together, then they were worried about the future, and we agreed with them. And so essentially we decided to create a platform from our platform, and instead plunged ourselves into further challenges financially and otherwise, but also for far higher rewards. So with risks come rewards, and this is what's interesting, is that the big R's, those that don't know about it, where have you been? But essentially, reasoning, responsibility, and reform, 3 words that we feel are useful conversation starters at the very least for trying to understand as to what we might do in MSK practice for the foreseeable, for it to have any sort of longevity, or for us to actually do and act on what we've been talking about for now a number of years. So essentially, the big R's has gone from strength to strength, although every time we've had a moment in which it's we've wondered how the next thing's going to go. George was funny the other night. George said to me when we were at an event in Wolverhampton, he was saying, essentially, he said, we're going to drop the ball soon, but not tonight.
That sounds like the motto of our entire careers.
Yeah.
It could happen at any moment.
Yeah, it's like, but it's just, and I think he's right there, is that essentially there's like, I think we're on firm foundations in terms of our thinking. You know, we've not stumbled across this by accident. We've built these relationships. We've got a credible platform with credible people that we've interviewed, and hopefully we've become credible ourselves to some extent. And then essentially, we are amateurs in various different ways, as certainly as broadcasters and as thinkers, and you know, we're creating ideas for events, and instead of using models that have existed before, we're creating things where essentially instead of having a speaker and then a Q&A, or even a live Q&A with a moderator, we're deciding to flip it on its head, have 20-minute keynotes followed by an hour and 10's worth of dialogue, amongst others, and involving a whole room in a Q&A, in which there's very few people at our conference, for example, that weren't speaking, and those that didn't want to put their hand up were able to interact through Slido. So essentially just a spectacular experience for us, and for me in 2018, whilst I don't think this will be, but if this was the high watermark and anything that we were able to achieve as an enterprise or as a team, as a group of friends as we are now, then, you know, I think we'd be able to say that we've helped to move the needle in the positive direction, at least by our perceptions. And if this was it, then great. Fortunate that it's not, of course, and hopefully we can continue to not drop the ball as George had said for much longer. But the project as it stands means that we're then, because it keeps thriving, we're now in a situation where we're like, right, what would be the thing that really brought everyone together? And we think that essentially having a central sort of document which would demonstrate principles called our Manifesto for Reform, under 5 chapters: excellence, governance, influence, education, and evidence, and to try to make sure that this is seen as something that is a coming together of all the different factions and all the different parts of different sectors, from patients through to professors, clinicians and students, and everyone wading in and building towards this. And so that'll be something that comes out in the autumn of next year. And so we're just so excited to see people beavering away in the background and working towards something that is based on our common shared values of putting reasoning at the heart of things, discussing the distribution of responsibility, and then describing what reform agenda might emerge from those conversations, including what to conserve that is good and what to reform that is less so. And that conversation just continues to develop, and the way in which we're able to touch on all the exciting things that are coming from elsewhere. You know, this is something that isn't trying to reinvent the wheel. It's trying to integrate all the good that's happening, trying to counteract some of the bad, but also then trying to just demonstrate that there is actually far more that brings us together than divides us, which obviously you hear a lot of, but it's nice for us to be able to actually enact that in our small part of this complex world.
I think from my point of view, with regards to the big R's, I mean, the whole project as a team, I've been slightly on the periphery of, mostly because I've been starting to look after the podcast a little bit more, but and just sort of logistical circumstances in that. But I think the individual components are what gets me. There's the whole overall target, but I just feel like the individual components have gone together so well, with it culminating in that conference, which, I mean, I don't know about the rest of you guys, I was exhausted afterwards with what we ran, but
yeah,
just for that conference to go that well and be that good, and I take it, I'm biased, but it genuinely is easily the best conference I've ever been to, and I've learned more at that than any 2 days of CPD across my over 10 years now of being a qualified physio. And I think it showed we can have a pie in the sky idea like we've had before and pull it off. And if people can think outside the box and run things slightly differently, these things do work.
I think it's not just necessarily, as you say, the lineup was, the people in that room was absolutely unbelievable. I think if we'd have sat there the year before and said, yeah, we'll get all these people in one room together for 2 days in Manchester, I don't think any of us would have believed it, really. But it wasn't just about the people that were in there. It was the conversation that came from it, and also the kind of development of the working groups from that as well, and people clearly showing a passion for wanting to be involved, and for wanting to drive forward change particularly within MSK practice. And that wasn't just from people in professional standpoints. That was, again, people from the patient sector. We were lucky to have the likes of Tina and Gilletta and Adrian there, and Pete Moore, who were absolutely fantastic and are great ambassadors for the patient cohort. But they, what was clear was that they've all got that same passion to move things forward to create better clinicians. So as well as having that benefit of fantastic CPD, it was also, I think, the offshoots that come from that.
One of the things as well that we were able to do is, weirdly, it just came together as we're describing, but we also really tried to be going about things differently with regards to our uses of technology, and making sure for our first conference we made it virtually available, which went really well, and we even had backup video and audio that we've never needed to use. Can't believe it, but we expected to need to lean on that at some point and haven't needed to. Managed to film and broadcast every single session, even though we had lots of workshops each day. So, there's various things that were great. But George, you really came into your own when we do these events by integrating novel technologies and also the running of them, because of course these interfaces can exist, but the actual application of them, it takes a bit of doing, and also the evaluation and making sure we act on the feedback. So from the Big Rs2, which was in April, you tested the water on Slido, and then we applied it at our conference, and various people continue to tell me that they've seen it used at other events before, but never to that extent. So of course want to thank you for that, but also just tell us a little bit and tell the audience a little bit about what that is and what you feel it brought to the conference that was different.
I think it just kept the conversation and everything going in the right direction. I remember, I think particularly after the first conference, I think out of reasoning, responsibility, and reform, the thing on cropping up was, the key word was reform. It was what was going to happen next and where's this going, you're using those kind of, whether it be internet, the applications and stuff like Slido, it allowed so many other people to be involved if they weren't there, and it just made sure that what happened during those events, it never went dry. Nothing ever stopped, and it just made sure that everything was constantly moving in the right direction. And I think it's, it makes it so much easier, doesn't it, if you've got momentum and other people chipping in with conversation and that. And I think it just helped, keep things flowing. And Rich mentioned the working groups. I mean, we've been able to collate all the information and from the Slido questions and everything. And I think the last thing you did at the last conference was say to all the delegates, right, what's your goals? Where do you want this to go? And we put that all together, and it's just carried on into the working groups. And I've only had a chance to look over a couple of the working groups, conversation on reform.physio, but it's just continuing to fly, really. It's great.
Well, you feel like it brought everyone together, didn't it? They recognised where everyone's values were shared, and also we could bring people together under what question marks they still had hanging over them, and what other bedfellows they had for their ideas. It was great to bring them together. So, thanks for doing that, George. I think it was fantastic, and I hope you're not fed up of it yet, because we certainly need you for future endeavours. It was fantastic. One thing I want to ask you guys then is that if we're talking about this lovely community that's emerged, and this event that brought us all together, and everything was all pleasant, although we still touched on contentious issues, but politely. What the hell's controversial about the big R's then?
From our point of view,
no, I mean, folks still reckon it is, don't they? Like, it's still contentious. It's still seen as being an agitating force, and not always in a pleasant way. So, what do you think it is about it that makes it seen as being so radical?
I think, Barnsley. I think from my point of view, I think it stems from a lack of understanding regarding what we're attempting to achieve. And I think people feel if you're not involved in the conversations that we're having, and you don't take things, if you try to take things as an affront to you as a person or you as a physiotherapist, then I can easily see how people can feel a bit excluded to a degree. And I genuinely believe that across the three conferences that we've had, the three meetings that we've had, there's not been any animosity towards any physiotherapists. It's about trying to raise the level of physiotherapy up as a unit. And there are the problems that have been discussed is not individual clinicians. It's about access to research, for example, or students getting a consistent experience across their placements, or their placements being consistent with their universities. And I think it's very, very big picture things that have been discussed, and the complaints that we've had towards us, or the negative points that we've had towards us, are sort of have been, well, if you'd come, you would see that that's not the case at all. But I can sort of see, if you're from an outside looking in, it can seem a bit exclusive. But the way that we had to run, certainly the first meeting, was naturally like that, because, as you said, we didn't really know what we were doing, for want of a better term. We just sort of went, let's have a chat in a big room and see what falls out of it. And it had to be a bit like that, because we needed to know, well, for a start, we needed to know who we were inviting. You can't invite people you've never heard of, but equally we wanted the conversation to flow in a way that we could not control, but we would have some sort of measure on, because otherwise, what would you get out of it? It'd be like Twitter. You're just all yelling into a big empty space. So I don't think there is anything, from my point of view, that is controversial about it. It's about trying to bring the whole profession upwards as a giant unit, but people need to have an open mind when they look at the things that come out and how they've come about, and join in the conversation. If you don't join in the conversation, you can't steer it where you feel it needs to go.
I think we just need to make sure that people hopefully can just be at least charitable enough to ask questions, rather than make the worst possible assumption of everyone. It's just, I don't think that's a big ask, really, but essentially I think if people were to at least do a bit more of that, then I think we'd win out. I just think that we've just got to make sure that the part of that where people suggest that there's a misunderstanding, the bits that we can park at our door and we can get our messaging better, and certainly as this next stage of the project develops, we're having to act on feedback immediately. There's no why people say, what's the end goal? It's like, God's sake, we just wanted to chat about it in a room, and we thought it'd be a good idea 12 months ago. So we're having to act on the feedback as it emerges. One of the things with the big R's we've just got to continue to do is try to make sure that we clarify the messaging as best we can, and be as clear as we can, and recognise to people that, apart from that one moment where we needed to get the people that had fed back most to the podcast into one room and gave some invites out, since then it's been nothing but inclusive. And you can register an account at reform.physio/community and have your voice heard and integrated into our next stage of the project. And then people need to recognise as well that essentially you're going to get unfavourable, uncharitable readings of what we're doing because people are sometimes averse to change or averse to our flavour or type or a style of agitation, and that's fine by them. But essentially they'll keep trying to shut us down, but we're not going anywhere. So that's one thing we just need to always continue to make clear.
So one thing we did want to talk about was sharing each of our favourite podcasts. So who wants to go first on that? Jack March, I'm picking you.
Oh, thank you.
Be quiet for too long.
Well, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, just because George has been talking so much.
Yeah, I was thinking about this morning with prep for coming on this evening and sort of having this podcast, and I thought that Jason Silvernail's podcast was absolutely nailed on for me. And then I looked back through the list and realised how many really good podcasts there were. And in the end, I've actually fallen on the last one that just came out with the Elbow. And the reason behind it is that mostly because it was a surprise as to how much I got out of that podcast. I thought that it was not going to be one-dimensional as such, but would be much more about tennis elbow or golfer's elbow, and the amount that Val was able to impart with regards to assessment and palpation and the tests of the elbow and the neuropathies of the elbow. Just I'm 3 listens through already, and I'm gonna have another go, I think. But mainly it's because we let Mark Reed do a podcast, and Val still managed to do a good job despite him being there. So that for that reason tipped it over to my favourite one of the year, I think.
Yeah, fair shout.
Rich, what was your favourite podcast?
Okay, well, again, I think probably half a dozen to at least pick from of favourites out of the 12, but certainly I think one that resonated with me was Ash James's podcast on the manual handling and low back pain debate, particularly sort of in view of some of the information that he put out there with regard to physiotherapists' perceptions on the safety of loaded spinal flexion, and that there was still quite a high degree of physiotherapists in practice who are still of the opinion that it's a dangerous thing. I guess we kind of all sort of a bit more aware now that of itself spinal flexion isn't necessarily dangerous. There are times when we're going to need to not stir the pot, but fundamentally that message is out there that it's flexing the spine is normal, loading a flexed spine is normal, and if it's graded appropriately, then we can look towards getting people back to quite significant amounts of loaded spinal flexion. And I think also some of the information that he talked about in terms of some of the research that's informing current manual handling practices and kind of how much out of date that is, based on models of spines that are no longer living and breathing, being placed in jigs. It was quite interesting to hear that.
That was a good one. George, what was yours?
Yes, I think mine almost going to sound a bit contradictory to the first question now, but it was a Red Flags podcast with Andrew Cuff, and I remember it tagged on really nicely to some research that was just being published at the time about the kind of sensitivity and specificity about red flags, and I remember it was just he did a really nice job of just explaining how they fit into clinical practice, and I remember him just kind of clinically reasoning really well what kind of red flags you're looking for, not just kind of wildly searching for red flags and hoping that you're going to kind of come across something that's going to make you understand something, but just really kind of like sensibly looking at the whole picture and how they fit into your assessment. I just thought it worked really well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to go next because if Chew goes on for 2 hours, it's going to be much easier to edit that if he's at the end. So my favourite one was the sleep podcast with Jason Silvernail. Partly because it was my first one. It was my first one behind the mic. Took me 2 years to build up the confidence to do that. So I was really pleased to do it with someone who was such a good interviewee as well, Jason. Just so much information crammed in, and a periphery topic as well. A topic that it's not on our curriculum. We don't talk about it a huge amount, but a really interesting one, a really vital one nonetheless. So I'll come to you last, Jack, about your favourite podcast.
Are you sure? Have we got the time?
I've got stuff to do this week, so
yeah, fair play. Yeah, is it Tuesday yet? I was torn, and yeah, as per usual. I really enjoyed this year. I think Jack's alluded to a few things where we've ended up having to bodge certain bits of it. But when you look back at the back catalogue, it's only because we've been so busy, but we've actually had some real bumper episodes that are real standouts to us. Two of them that I'll mention. One was we did the Patient Matters, which was with Adrian McGregor, who's become a household name, and he's almost been on a tour sharing his story these days, big R's and otherwise. And that's been a really interesting thing for me. But it maps onto another one with Leslie Holsworth. So I'm going to name them both because they're both two really important people that I've happened to meet in the last couple of years. And the main thing really is that they both told me that people are going to push back against everything that you in the team do because you stand for something, and that intimidates people. And they both said it for different reasons. Adrian, because he was pleased that we weren't taking him down dead ends, and he found us through the podcast, and we've helped him with various different things in his life. But he said that essentially it was the consistency of what we were doing without being dismissive of things. It wasn't consistent because we were narrow. It was just consistent that we were admitting to what we were unsure about. And then with Leslie, she was saying the same when she's observed us at events and been very complimentary of the team that we have. And she's just said, just keep chipping away at what you're doing, keep being reflective. But essentially, you're always going to find that people are going to be frustrated and suggest that you're being heretics. But that's because you're standing for something and you're doing the right things. So that was really reassuring. And so those two podcasts from those two individuals were spectacular for me personally, and went down a storm as well. So it really does... and that for me really is what we're all about, isn't it? It's exactly what we're trying to do, is help patients and instigate change on every level. And so that really, for me, epitomises what we've done over the course of the 5 years. But for that to be demonstrated across this year, from patients through to high-level policymakers and changes like that, from Adrian to Leslie, I think is representative of what we've been doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I said that it's going to be a funny one, and any milestone makes me a little bit nostalgic. And people have noticed that at recent events that we've had, including at the conference, I was a bit of a blubbery mess. And I think that one of the things that's funny is because it just really means something, not just to me and to Charlotte and to you guys I know as well, but also it's just that there's a real meaning under what we do. Education and healthcare at the heart of what we stand for. And that's what you guys have signed up for, and why you're supportive of what we're doing is typically, when I ask you, it's because it's something that you see as being integral to your values and something that is enriching your lives in order to help others. And whilst I understand and hope that this brings things to your lives that are interesting and that we continue to work together on these things, I don't want it to be unknown and unsaid wherever possible, just how much it means to us that you guys will involve yourselves as you do and get in the trenches for us when times get tough, and to work on these projects, and then just as things start to settle down, something new crops up or new controversies emerge. And it's just a phenomenal honour to work with you all and to become so close as we are as a team and as friends, some of which some of you I've known a long time before Physio Matters, and some of you I've met through it. and for us all to be as close as we are now, and for the sense-making network that we have as a group, but also the expansion of that and the rings that surround what we're doing, that are ever growing and involving now thousands of people that we can rely on and lean on to get in the trenches with us, is a phenomena. And it's because you guys have made it a team, and you've made it far. It was very quickly bigger than me, and then realizing, admittedly humbly, that you guys know that it's bigger than you, it's bigger than us, and it needs to be something that matters to all of us. And so, yeah, cheesy as hell, but physio matters to us, healthcare matters to us. And whilst we continue to do what we're doing, I just want you to all know, and for it to be on record, on air once more, that it's an absolute privilege in my life to work with you all, and for you to be contributing to what we're doing as much as we have a laugh. It's serious business, and we're instigating serious change. And after the big R's, especially when I get back into work on a Monday morning, I've got missed calls and voicemails from senior civil servants asking what the hell we're making a load of noise on the internet about healthcare for out of nothing. And chief execs of various different corporations that are baffled by the way in which we're doing viral marketing and expecting there to be some sort of crazy budget behind it, but actually there isn't. There's actually just a group of people that have got values that are at the heart of what they're doing, and they're passionate about it, and we're creating amazing things. So thank you so much for all you're doing. Have a wonderful Christmas, and to you listeners out there, I hope we can deliver a decent cheesy sign out for you, because I know that's what you're here for. I do think we should try and do a quick lap in case anyone's got. So no one has any final words on what we're doing. Even you, Barnsley, that surprises me.
No, mate, no.
I think the only thing I do is just to echo the thoughts we had about the patrons and all the listeners that do tune in, because if the listeners all dropped off, then we would have to stop doing this thing that we all enjoy. So, I want to thank everybody that's ever listened and gives us feedback and gets in touch on social media, sends us an email. And I think we have to thank you a little bit as well, Chewy, because without you, who would we get annoyed at for the world's longest introductions? So,
and today outros, but yeah, and
today outros.
Less of that.
but genuinely, I don't know about you guys, but the fact that we reach so many years and we get so much feedback of people saying thank you and that we've helped them in their careers, it keeps us going. And I find this incredibly enjoyable, and the fact that it helps people is even better. And I think as long as we keep doing that, then we won't go anywhere.
Flick, can you therefore reel off all the different channels in which we have on social media, etc. then? So we're saying about people, thank you for all your feedback, and then sometimes people don't realise just how they can access us in various different ways.
They can. So you can access us at TPM Podcast on Instagram, on Facebook, and on Twitter.
And on YouTube and on Spotify. I'm trying to think what else there is. Newsletter.
LinkedIn.
Oh, for God's sake! I don't know why you set that page up. That's such a waste of your time. We talk about sodding efficiency all the time, and then Jim's setting up LinkedIn, Pinterest, Tumblr. Join us on Bebo. Cheers. Absolute waster. Right, yeah, I love it. There you have it, episode 61. So session 61 of Physio Matters, the launch of season 2.0. Lots more to come, as you can imagine, through this year, as we've discussed. And I know it's a bit of a bonus episode, this first of the year, so thanks for tuning in. I know we do get many thousands of you doing so, and clearly being involved in what we're doing and interested in what we've got planned. So really do appreciate that. Do check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all those other things we've just mentioned, but also on Kickstarter. So that we'll be announcing that soon across all our different channels. We really appreciate any support you can throw at us for that, to support any of our additional content. This is something that we started as a monthly podcast, and we swear to bring you that in all its quality that we can this year. But if you're interested in any of the additional material or to support the travel of guests that you're after or want to put in requests for different things, then do pay attention on Kickstarter, because there's going to be opportunity to do that at certain amounts, certain levels. You'll be able to suggest and poll for different guests. You'll be able to access the material from all of our conferences, including the Big R's conference, which was Reforming MSK Practice. So if you were to donate a certain amount into our Kickstarter fund, you will have full access to those sorts of videos, therefore giving you full content as to what are changing times in physiotherapy, and you will be able to see the material that is helping to influence that. So lots of things to look forward to. Thanks again for listening, and probably one of the most entertaining parts of our chat from this podcast was this cheesy sign out that we tried to do as a team. And hats off to George Goodwin for the most poignant pause I think we've ever had on the show to bring together the start of season 2 of the show. So I'll see you next month, and thanks again for tuning in.
You've been listening
to the Physio Matters podcast,
discussing physio matters.
Because physio matters.
Oh my God.